So just as a quick review, I'm Jason Gardner. I had a 30-year career in the SEAL teams, served at every level of leadership, and then at tactical leadership and then executive leadership. I was the Command Master Chief of SEAL Team 5 and our training detachment before retiring in 2019. And essentially for the last almost 6 years now, I have been an echelon front leadership instructor. And today I'm going to talk to you about specific examples of training and how they made a difference on the battlefield. But I want to give you just a quick, go back for a little history lesson here. So 2006 is the Battle of Ramadi, which Leif and Jocko deployed to with Task Unit Bruiser. And just so you know, this would be the most intense combat that the SEAL teams would see since Vietnam. Now, sure, there was all kinds of other things going on, but the combat that they saw was sustained and intense and essentially every day. So what that meant was Jocko and Leif were now some of our most experienced combat leaders. And what that also meant is that they were the people that are in the best place to start training other SEALs. Now, your tendency when you've got a really experienced person is to go ahead and keep them out there on the battlefield maybe, or keep them in ops because they're doing a great job. But there's just one of them, as opposed to taking those two and putting them in positions where they can train other SEALs and have an effect over essentially the whole West Coast. So in 2007, when they were up for orders, Leif took over the junior officer training course, which was a program that was set up to train our young leaders after they made it through our selection course in leadership before they came to the SEAL teams. And then Jocko took over our training detachment. Now the training detachment runs all the sustainment training for the West Coast SEAL teams. And each SEAL team does a 1.5 year workup preparing to deploy. And the training detachment manages all of that. And there's a lot that SEALs do getting ready to deploy. Now, when Jocko took over the training detachment, as he's mentioned already, he noticed that there were some severe flaws in the ways we were training and SEAL task units weren't doing well. And he also realized that our training was not adequately preparing us for the battlefield. So let me ask you this. Do people like change? No, they don't. No one likes change. But when there is change, there's always one person that likes to change. And who is that? The person that came up with the change always likes it. Our slang term for that in the SEAL teams was the good idea fairy. Every time we'd be out there doing stuff and some change came down, we'd be like, oh, who is the good idea fairy who came up with this idea? And Jocko would realize this, so when he got all the leaders from the different cells that ran the different training at the training detachment, instead of telling them how to make their training more realistic, he asked them. He said, hey, can you come up with ways to make your blocks of training more realistic? Absolutely genius. He pushed ownership down to them. And what's more, they're actually the best persons to come up with the ideas on how to make their training more realistic because they're the experts in that training. So since it was their idea and they came up with the change, they actually enacted all the change. So that's got us up to 2007. Now we're in 2008. And this photo of me is taken, and the me in that picture, this is out at our land warfare training area. And at this time, I've got 19 years experience in the SEAL teams. I have 3 combat deployments under my belt. I'm in a stacked task unit. I'm the senior chief, so that means I'm the second in command of this SEAL task unit. And all of the leaders in my task unit have combat experience, and a lot of our guys have got combat experience. So as we're going through this workup, I don't think we're really going to get challenged by much. This isn't our first rodeo. And the land warfare block of training is 3 weeks long. We do immediate action drills, we fire our weapons, we're patrolling through the desert, we practice getting ambushed by the enemy, we practice what we'll do if there's a downed man, and the task unit was crushing it. Now, the last week of that training block is what's called an FTX week, field training exercise. And every night for 5 nights, we're going to go out and do a full mission profile operation. So they've got target sites built up for us, and we're going to go out and hit them. Now, up until this point in my career, when we did these full mission profile missions, we did them live fire, and that means with real bullets. Who can come up with some drawbacks to live fire training? Just shout them out. What do you think are some drawbacks to live fire training? It's dangerous. Yes, it's super dangerous. So when we do our ORM or our risk mitigation, we purposely make the targets less stressful so no one gets shot. And honestly, with all the risk mitigation that we do, it's about once every 5 years a SEAL gets shot in training, even with that. So can you see how making a target site less stressful doesn't actually represent the battlefield? What's another drawback to live fire training? And this has to do with realism. The enemy is not shooting back at me, right? It's a cardboard silhouette, and go figure, cardboard silhouettes don't do any of the things that the actual enemy does on the battlefield. So the thing that the land warfare folks, and that's Steve Ward, was running that training at that time, came up with to make it more realistic was they found this laser tag system on steroids where we could actually use our real weapons and fire blanks, and then a computer tracked everything that was going on. If I fired my weapon, it tracked whether I got a hit or miss, and it tracked who I hit or miss. And then they had a bunch of other Navy SEALs to play all the bad guys, the opposition forces. So we're in a classroom that's about 1/8 of the size of this room, and it's the first operation that we're getting ready to go on, and I just finished up the brief for that night's operation, where we are going to go hit a set of 4 or 5 compounds that's nestled in some rocky hillsides and capture an insurgent leader and fight a bunch of insurgents. We get done with our brief. Jocko and his staff are sitting in the back of the classroom, and when the brief is done, they tell us all the points where our brief was weak and how we could improve it. And then when that was done, Steve stands up in front of all of us and he says, "Hey fellas, I need you to pay attention to where all your people are on the battlefield tonight, because ever since we upgraded to this new laser tag system, every single SEAL task unit that's come through this training has shot one of their own guys." And I'm sitting in the front row, and I just roll my eyes in my head, and I'm thinking to myself, what a pack of losers. How in the world do you shoot your own guys? No way. This task unit isn't going to do that. So we go out and we do our rehearsals, and about 6 hours later, we get dropped off by Humvees at a point, and then we do about a 4-kilometer offset patrol through the desert to outside the compounds. We set isolation and containment on the compounds. That means we pushed elements up to high ground, and then we send our assault force in. How do you think that target assault went? It was a disaster. It was a disaster. Up until this point, we trained to shoot against cardboard silhouettes that don't do anything real people do, and now everybody's moving around. There's an enemy shooting back at us that isn't staying stationary. They're moving around. They're doing all kinds of things to confuse us. We're confusing ourselves by trying to talk on the radio at the same time, move around. We got bogged down. It was terrible. Half an hour later, we were only halfway through the target, still in fire with the enemy on the target and external to the target, when we started taking a simulated mortar barrage. Mortars are these bombs the enemy can launch at you from a couple kilometers away, and your only way to save yourself from them is just not be there when they land. So we made the call to break off the target and started moving towards our extraction point. Under fire, it was a big mess. We were about 2 kilometers away from the target when we finally realized that we'd left 4 guys behind, and then we had to fight our way back and go find them. They were dead on a hillside, drag them back, go back to the compound, and get our debriefs. So when I was going in for the debrief, I knew that we'd done poorly because we didn't even finish the op. We left and left 4 guys behind, but I wasn't aware of how poorly we'd done. Not only did we have a blue on blue like every other SEAL task unit before us, but ours was particularly egregious because we had an entire SEAL fire team, so 6 SEALs, wipe out our sniper element. And I wasn't that far away from it when it happened. It was chaos when we were breaking off the target. Everyone's talking on the radio, everyone's screaming, there's explosions, there's smoke, there's machine guns going on. Somebody points up to high ground and says, hey, do we have guys up there? Another guy looks at his battle map, says, no, we're not supposed to. And then that whole fire team, all guns blazing, just like the Judas Priest song, dunk, 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 wiped out our sniper element who was just trying to maneuver down and link up with us. So, when you shoot one of your own folks in training, you get what's called a safety violation. And this is a pretty serious document. It goes in your training record. And if you get 3 safety violations in one block of training, you have to go to an administrative board, and they may throw you out of the SEAL teams. And people have been thrown out of the SEAL teams because they're unsafe. This happens. So obviously, all the guys that shot their buddies are going to get a safety violation. What should be more obvious to you is that as the leader, I was the tactical lead, I was managing all the down and in. Those were my chess pieces that killed each other. I was also going to get a safety violation. Now, the way they do this is they start with the junior man, and then they work their way up. So I just got to sit out there and kind of wander around and feel bad about myself, waiting to walk down to the Jocko's office and sit across a table from him and Steve and get my safety violation. Now you can imagine how small I felt when I walked in, and here's a picture of Jocko smiling, and that's what's sitting across the table. And imagine too that at this point in the SEAL teams, the guys that were in Task Unit Bruiser are legends to all of us. So I felt really bad about shooting our own guys, and then really bad that I did it in front of Jocko. I sit down across the table from him. They push the sheet of paper, which is the document, the safety violation, across the table to me. And I start reading it. And the first paragraph says, Senior Chief Gardner lost track of his forces, resulting in 4 friendly killed in action. The second paragraph gave us some tactics, techniques, and procedures that we could use so that we didn't shoot one another. And then the next paragraph said that basically, hey, if you have any more blue on blue incidents, you're probably going to go to an administrative board, and there's a possibility of you getting relieved as the task unit senior chief. And then there was this blank space labeled comments. And this is where you essentially write your excuses. There are any. Do you think I wrote anything in that comment section? No, I did not. I signed the bottom of the paper and I push it back across the table to Jocko and Steve. And up until this point, they hadn't said a word to me. And when I push it back across the table to them, Jocko says, "I'm glad this happened to you." I'm like, bro. Why? I mean, Jocko and I have been friends since '93, and I'm thinking, why would you be happy that I got a safety violation in my training? This is my first safety violation ever. And he can see the expression on my face, and so he follows it up with, "Hey, I'm glad this happened to you because this happened to me for real on the battlefield, and it's horrible. And I want you to make your mistakes here in training." You see, initially when he said, "I'm glad this happened to you," I was like, dang it, you're glad I have a safety violation? But no, what he meant was, hey, this is an opportunity for you to learn, and I know you're going to take it on board, and I know you'll get better. So, walk out of there, get together with the rest of the task unit. We got all our leadership together, and essentially, we started thinking about what we'd done wrong. Now, the human nature is, when things go that poorly and you make that many mistakes, you want to pull out the blame thrower, and here comes the blame and the counter accusation. That's not what we did as a task unit. What we did as a task unit was we took our advice from the Claymore anti-personnel mine right up here and oriented ourselves front towards enemy. And what this means is just face your fears, look at what you did wrong, and address it and face it and do something about it. So we got together and we started having a discussion. And our discussion was, hey, what are the top 4 things we did wrong tonight? Now, we did a lot more than 4 things wrong, but we got to prioritize and execute, don't we? We have to apply these laws of combat, which Jocko had taught us at this point, to this situation. So we had a discussion, we came up with the top 4 things we did wrong, and we came up with modifications to our standard operating procedures so that we could fix those problems. Next day, did our brief, did our rehearsals, went out and did the next op. And Jocko and Steve, like good trainers, that next op was significantly more difficult than the night before. Now, luckily, we went out and completed the next op without shooting one another. But we made a bunch of other mistakes. And so we followed the same mindset. Hey, let's get together after we had our debrief where they tell us what we did wrong. Let's figure out what are the top 4 things we did wrong and how could we fix them. By the time we got to that 5th and final operation, we absolutely mauled the opposition forces. So these are other SEALs that play the bad guys, and they play bad guys for every SEAL single task unit that comes through. They know the target sites, they know all that, and they couldn't slow us down. Now with this laser tag system, they can remotely put people down, so we did have several wounded, we had several casualties, and we were managing our casualties and hammering the enemy like a firestorm. And I'm very, very thankful to Jocko and Steve that they put our task unit through that intense training. And I'm really thankful that I had the experience of having that blue and blue and having to go in front of Jocko and get that safety violation. Because when my task unit deployed in 2009, we went to Afghanistan. Now, across the span of my 30-year career, I have 5 combat deployments. This deployment to Afghanistan was the most intense and most violent of all those combat deployments. It was 8 months long. We had over 340 hours of troops in contact. There were 3 different situations on that deployment where we were within a razor's edge of shooting at each other. But because I was just so paranoid about the concept of a blue on blue, because of training, we always caught it. One time we nearly dropped a bomb on an Afghan platoon that we were working with who decided to go do a patrol and didn't tell us about it. Another time we were taking fire from our left flank and we didn't hear over the radio that a SEAL unit had moved into that flank. And so we almost returned fire on them, but we weren't comfortable, and it saved us. So as I talk about all of this training, and I'm telling you this really kind of intense story, for you may be going, oh, cool, Jason, that's great. How do I apply this in my house, in my business? Well, you can. You can just come up and you know where your friction points are, where you have difficulties. And then you can set up training, whether it's formal or informal, because you should be doing it all the time. And then run through the training. And at home, there's all kinds of training you should be doing with your kids. You should run little drills. Hey, what are we going to do if the house catches on fire? What happens if we get a flat tire and we got to get inside of the road? All these things are things that you can train. And when you're running training, you're investing in your people. And what's a bigger indicator to your people than you care about them, than you investing in making them better? And when your folks know that you care about them, they'll work harder, they'll do better, and the whole team will do better. So I want to tell you about one of our last operations on that Afghanistan deployment. We were going to hit, and on this operation, we weren't going after a specific individual, so this wasn't a personality-based target, but there was this bazaar, and what a bazaar is an outdoor market, and the Taliban was making explosives in the bazaar, so they had fertilizer and diesel fuel and all kinds of crazy caustic chemicals. And they were making explosives, and they were also taking those explosives and making improvised explosive devices. Because all of this is stuff that you really wouldn't want to do in your house. And so we had intelligence that that's what they were doing in this bazaar. So we got dropped off in the middle of the night, about 4 or 5 kilometers away, so that no one would hear us coming. And we did an offset patrol in to the bazaar. Now, where this bazaar was located, there was a large mountain on one side of the bazaar, actually not a mountain, but a hill. And it was a real dominating terrain feature right next to that bazaar. And then the other side of it was a Taliban village. It's where everybody was living. We come in, there was a smaller hill a little ways away from the bazaar, and I dropped off with a squad of like 7 other SEALs on that hilltop. Then our assault force moved in, and they kind of staged right at the mouth of the bazaar, because we're going to wait for the sun to come up to clear it. And then we pushed another element of SEALs up onto that bigger hill that was in between the bazaar and the village, because it was a real dominating terrain feature. So I hear over the radio that they're moving up onto the hill, and I'm filling up a sandbag, building the fighting position, and all of a sudden I hear this boom! I look across to that hillside on the other side of the bazaar, and I can see a big dust cloud coming up. And I get on the radio, and I called over to the leader of that SEAL element, and I said, hey, is everybody okay? And he came back in an amazingly clear and concise voice and said, no, we have a severely wounded SEAL, and we're working through some issues. So they were just up on the top of that hilltop, and they were looking for a spot to dig in, and as they were doing that, one of the SEALs stepped on a landmine. And when that mine detonated, it blew both of his legs clean off. A huge piece of frag came up and hit him in the belly. But because we practiced cover and move, the 2 SEALs on either side of him, hey, these guys aren't medics. Their eardrums have been ruptured by the blast. They pounced on him. They take his tourniquets off. They get a tourniquet on each stump. He's still bleeding. Now they're using their tourniquets. Another tourniquet on each stump. He's still bleeding. Finally, 3 tourniquets is what it takes to get the bleeding under control. And then his bowels are hanging out. They take a cravat, which is like a big green bandana. They gather him up. They tuck it in his belt. They take an IV bag and stab it to keep it clean and moist. Again, cover and move. There was an EOD guy with him. He rushes over, and he's got a metal detector, and he's sweeping around looking for any other mines. But the whole hill's covered with metal. So this thing's just going ding, 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 ding. He just chucks it. He pulls out his knife, and he pushes his knife into the soil, and now he's probing the soil with his knife, looking for other mines. Again, cover and move. A SEAL sees him doing that. He gets shoulder to shoulder with him, and the 2 of them are pushing their knives into the soil, looking for other mines. 30 seconds later, a call comes over the radio. Hey, we found another mine. We're marking it with a red chem light. A red chem light is like a glow stick. Another 30 seconds go by, and they say, hey, we found another mine. We're marking it with the red chem light. And then the radio call comes out. hey, we're in the middle of a minefield, no one can move up here. Now this is really bad. Because 9 guys are up on a hillside, one of them is critically wounded, and no one can move or take cover if they start getting shot at. And that Taliban village, they heard the explosion, the lights are starting to come on. But because we kept things simple, all the radio comms were simple, clear, and concise. Because we practiced, prioritize, and execute, everybody understood, hey, wounded SEAL, that's a problem, but the big priority is getting ourselves in a position where if the Taliban counterattacks us or attacks us right now, we can manage it. And because we practice decentralized command, our assault force, without any orders or being told what to do, broke their positions up and moved an element to each side of that hillside so they could keep weapons trained on that village in case they did attack. Again, decentralized command. Our radio men were calling back to the Roll 2 Trauma Center, letting the surgeons there know the young man's blood type, mechanism of injury, and anything else they had to know to be ready to receive him. And our Joint Tactical Air Controllers, which are our SEALs that talk to the aircraft, were talking to the medevac helicopter, telling it a safe place that it could land to get our wounded teammate out. Now, it took half an hour to clear a safe route off that mined hilltop and get that wounded SEAL off the hilltop and onto that medevac helicopter, which was 3 minutes from running out of gas. And all of that happened without myself or the task unit commander having to give one order. Now, he got choppered out. It's like a 45-minute flight back to Kandahar from where we were at. Sun came up. We cleared that bazaar. We destroyed a bunch of explosives and other nefarious material, got in a big firefight with the Taliban. And then the next night, or actually morning, it was 4 a.m. when we extracted from that operation. So it's been 24 hours since our teammate's been pulled off the battlefield. When we landed at the Kandahar airfield, the first place that we went when we got off the helicopter was straight over to that Roll 2 Trauma Center. And as I was walking over there, I was thinking to myself, well, surely by now they've transferred him to the big hospital in Germany where he can get the top level of care. Go through the front doors, you go in there, there's like kind of a waiting room, and then there's a nurse sitting behind a desk. And I asked him, I said, hey, is Dan Knosson still here? And he goes, yeah. And I lost it a little bit. I was like, what do you mean he's still here? It's been 24 hours. Why is he not in Germany? Kind of just like that, a little too much default aggressive. And he goes, hey, give me a second. I'll go get the surgeon that's been working on him for the last 18 hours, and you can talk to him. So I wait out there, and then he pokes his head through the door and waves me back, and I go back and I see this exhausted surgeon, because Dan isn't the only wounded guy he's working on. And he takes me into Dan's room, and Dan's unconscious still. He's on a respirator. It's all kinds of machines going ping and beep and all that. And he goes, hey, listen, Dan had a lot of damage to his abdomen. And he goes, he's flatlined on us 3 times since he's been in here. He's not stable. We can't put him on that plane to take him to Germany yet. And he's like, he told me, he goes, I'm going to be honest with you. With all his damage to his belly, I don't think he's going to make it. Well, Dan did make it, and he won a gold medal in the Paralympics and 2 silver medals. So training works. It's an investment in your people. Go get after it.